Last week, we recreated the Homecoming TV show poster, and today we'll work on recreating the David Bowie Best Of album cover. Thank you so much to Joseph for requesting this Copycat Wednesday tutorial. If you would like to follow along with me, then check out the link to the tutorial images in the description. Okay, let's get started with today's Copycat Wednesday. This is the document that we're going to work with. It is 1300 by 1300 pixels with a resolution of 72. And I'm also going to work with this document that contains some of my photos that we're going to use for the album cover a little later on. We're going to come back to these in a moment. For now, we're going to focus on working with the background, and all that will happen in this document. Also, I'm going to enable my rulers. I'll press Control R on Windows, Command R on the Mac to enable them. And what I'm going to do is click and drag a guide over into the 300 pixel position. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you're just a little bit off, that's okay. So 300 pixels here, and I want to be 300 pixels away from the other edge. So I need to be at 1000 pixels because it's a total of 1300 pixels wide. So I'll place my guide right about here. Next, I'll make a background using a solid color fill layer, and I want to use a light blue background. So let me just find the right color here. This blue seems like it'll work, and I'll press OK. I'll delete this background layer because we won't need it. You can delete a layer by selecting it and pressing the backspace key on Windows. That's the delete key on the Mac. And I'll delete the layer mask since I won't be needing it, and we can just have a cleaner layers panel. And I'll rename this layer background. So this will be the main background for my album cover. Next, I'll create those pixelated sides to the album cover, the ones that you see in the original one, of course. And what I'll do is go into File, New, and I'm going to create a document that's twice as big as 1300 by 1300. So that will be 2600 by 2600, and I will press the Create button. This creates this new document. And what I'm going to do now is select the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to hold the Z key. I'm not letting go of that Z key. I'm just holding it. And then I'm going to click to zoom in. And when I release, I will jump back into the rectangular marquee tool. This technique is known as a spring-loaded keyboard shortcut. If you just tap and hold on a key, you'll enable that tool. For example, I can tap the B key for the brush tool. I could paint, and then when I release, I jump back into the tool I was previously using. If I simply just tap on the key and let go of that key, it'll switch over to that tool. But with spring-loaded keyboard shortcuts, you can hold a key. This time I'll hold down the I key for the eyedropper tool, and there it is, and I can click and drag to make a selection, and when I release the I key, it springs back into the previously selected tool. So keep that in mind. Spring-loaded keyboard shortcuts. And what I'm going to do is hold the spacebar, click and drag to pan up, and I'm going to click and drag with the marquee tool to make a selection that is 35 pixels tall. The width really doesn't matter. In this case, it's also 35 pixels, but just worry about the height, 35 pixels. And what I'll do now is create a new layer and make sure that I fill with a color that is close to black. So I'm going to click on my foreground color to bring up the color picker, and I'll select a color that is close to black. I'll make sure that hue and saturation are set to 0, and I'll set the brightness to 15, and I'll press OK. I'm going to fill with that foreground color now. So I'll press Alt and Backspace on Windows. That's Option Delete on the Mac. Next, I'm going to click and drag this selection down 35 pixels. And what I'll do now is fill with that same color. Alt Backspace, Option Delete. And now I'm going to press Control I, Command I to invert. So now I have an off-white color, and that's exactly what I want. I'll come over into the Layers panel, and I'll hold the Control key on Windows, that's the Command key on the Mac, and click on the layer thumbnail to select both of those boxes. Then I'll go into Edit, Define Pattern, and this is going to make a pattern using these stripes. And I'll just call this pattern Stripes so that I know what it is. So now I can press Control D, Command D on the Mac to deselect, delete this layer because I don't need it anymore, and go into the new adjustment layer icon, and I can create a pattern fill layer. and that will create a pattern using the pattern that I just created. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen so that you can see what that looks like. Next, I'm going to create a new layer. Make sure that black and white are my foreground and background color. You can simply tap on the D key to make that happen. Then you can go into Filter, Render, Clouds. And that will create a clouds pattern. Next, you can change the blending mode, and we'll start with the multiply blending mode, which will make the brighter areas darker like you see there. And I'm going to duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, Command J on the Mac, and I'll change the blending mode to the second layer to screen, and I can bring down the opacity, and this of course controls the luminosity of the stripes. I don't want the stripes to be completely black. I want there to be some variance in brightness in them. I want dark areas and brighter areas, and you can control it accordingly. Maybe something like this will work. What I'll do now is double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. I'll select the top layer by clicking on it, scroll down, hold shift, and click on the pattern fill layer to select all the layers in between. Then I'll press Ctrl E on Windows, Command E on the Mac. And what I'm going to do now is zoom in a little bit so that I can see what is going on. And I want to give this image a little more contrast. So I'm going to go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and I'm just going to adjust this accordingly. Like so. So I'm just going to bring out some areas so that they're brighter, some areas are fairly dark, and I can just adjust it any way that I want. So I just want to have variance in these stripes. I don't want them to be completely black. I think this will work, and I'll press OK. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and what I'll do now is go into Filter, Pixelate, Mosaic. And in this window, you need to make sure that the cell size matches the height that you used in the beginning to create these stripes. In my case, it was 35 pixels, so make it 35 here and press OK. And that gives you the result that you see there. If I zoom in, you can see this looks a lot like the pattern that you saw on the sides of the original album cover. What I'll do now is apply a gradient map. So I'll go into the new adjustment layer icon and select gradient map. From here, I can click on this gradient in the properties panels to bring up the gradient editor, and I'm going to create 4 stops. The first stop here in the location of 0% will be a dark blue. So let me open it up by clicking on the swatch and selecting a bluish color. I think this would work. I'll press OK. Then I'm going to click right about here to add another stop, and I'll move this over to the left so that I'm at about the 15% location, and this is going to be a brighter blue. So let me click and drag this down a little bit just to change the hue a bit, and I'm going to click and drag this up a little bit. I think this color will work, and I'll press OK. Next, I'm going to add a stop right at the 75 mark, which is right about here. And I'm going to change this to a light blue color. The color that I'm looking for is right up here. I think this will work, and I'll press OK. And then I'm going to make this into an off-white color. So just click and drag it over right about here, but make sure that it's in the blues. And I'll press OK. I'll press OK one more time, and this is my final result. I don't think I have the contrast that I want yet, so what I'll do is I'll create a levels adjustment layer above this pattern layer, and then I can adjust how intense some of these colors are. See that? See, that's starting to look a lot more like what you saw on the actual album cover. So you are always welcome to adjust this, since we are always working non-destructively. So I can click on this layer now, the one on top, hold shift and click on the pattern layer, right click and convert it into a smart object. Then with the move tool selected, I'm going to click and drag this smart object into our working document by hovering over the tab. When it switches over, you can hover to the middle and release. And now this smart object is in my working document. I can now close this document. I don't need to save it. And if I ever need to come back into it, I can just double click on the smart object and it will open up in a new tab and I can make any adjustments that I want. For now, I don't need to make any adjustments. I need to press Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform, and then press Ctrl-0, Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out to the bird's eye view so that you can see the transformation handles. Next, I'm going to right-click and select Perspective, and I'm just going to click and drag down to change the perspective, and I'm also going to drag it down until it snaps to the center. Then I can right-click again and select Scale, and click and drag this midpoint right about here, and click and drag this one over here, and then right click once again, select perspective, and keep adjusting the perspective of my wall like so. And just feel free to adjust it any way that you want. I think that for me, this is pretty good here, and I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes. Then I'll press Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac to duplicate that layer. And I can press Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform, right-click and select Flip Horizontal, and I can move this onto the other side. And I can actually go past the edge there just so that it doesn't seem like a repeating pattern. And actually, in this case, I'm going to go a bit further. I'm going to go right up to the line. And I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes. Also, in the original album cover, the right edge had a blurry outline, so I'll work on that next. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Then on this layer, I'll create a layer mask by clicking on the layer mask icon, select the brush tool, and paint with black using a soft brush with a hardness of 0%. And I'm just going to click and drag down like so. And I'm just blurring those edges. I'm going to tap on the left bracket key on the keyboard to reduce my brush size. And once again, I'll continue painting on those edges like so. That looks pretty good. What I'm going to do now is work on my source images here where we have my face. Just to save a little time, I've already gone ahead and masked myself out. If you don't know how to mask or need a refresher, then I have plenty of Photoshop tutorials that teach you how to do that. In fact, I have a playlist on YouTube with over 20 videos on making cutouts and masking that you can check out right now. I'll place a link to my masking playlist below in the description, and you can watch the video on select and mask to get your image to this point. But anyway, with the move tool active, I'm going to click and drag my portrait onto our working document just as I did before by dragging it into the tab. Then when the tab switches over, I can drop it in the center and I can position it accordingly. And what I'll do now is select the rectangular marquee tool and click and drag a box from up here to right about this area like so, and click on the layer mask icon to create a layer mask. What I'll do next is recreate that effect that you saw on the top left and the top right of the album cover. And in the original album cover, I think what they did is just use different photos from different albums. In this case, I'm just going to try to replicate that effect by using just adjustment layers. But I believe that the actual album cover used different photos. But in this case, like I said, just to save some time, we're just going to use adjustment layers. So what I'm going to do is click on the new adjustment layer icon and select a gradient map. And I'm going to make it into a clipping mask. You can do so by clicking on this icon. And with the clipping mask, the gradient map will only affect the layer below, which is the layer that contains my face. And what I'm going to do here is apply a dark purple and pink effect to this layer. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the gradient map to bring up the gradient editor. Next, I'm going to double click on the color stop to bring up the color picker. And I'm going to select a dark purple, something like that. And I'll press OK. Then right about the 50% mark here under location, I'm going to create another stop simply by clicking on the gradient. And this will be a pink color. Something like this, maybe like off red, something like that. And I'll press OK. And at the 90% mark, right about here, I'm going to make this stop yellow. Maybe a darker shade of yellow, something like that. And you can keep adjusting these so that they change how they're applied to your overall image. And I think that this purple might be a little too bright. So let me change that and make it a little bit darker like so. I'll press OK. And this one might also be just a little too dark, so I'll brighten it up just a little bit and maybe adjust the hue accordingly and press OK. So there we go. That's the effect that it creates. And what I can do now is delete the layer mask by right-clicking on it and selecting Delete Layer Mask. Next, I'll select the rectangular marquee tool and make a rectangular selection right about here. Actually, I'll hold the spacebar and move the box over to the right a bit more. I think I need to be more off-center. And maybe right about here, and click on the layer mask icon to create a layer mask, and it contains the effect just to that area. What I can do now is create another gradient map, clip it to the layer below by clicking on this icon, or you can press Ctrl-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac. And I'll go ahead and delete the layer mask now because I know that I'll be creating a new one in a moment. What I'll do now is click on the gradient map to bring up the gradient editor. And now I'm going to create 4 colors here in the stops. The first one is okay at black, but I'll move it over a little bit to maybe the 20% location. The next one I'll place right here, right about 45, and I'll make this one red, like a darker red. Then I'll add one more at about 60, and I will make this one yellow. I'll press OK. And on this last one, I'll double click on it and make it a skin color. So something like this, more or less. And I can move it over into the 70% mark, more or less, right about here. And I'm going to click on the color stop to bring up the color picker and select a color that resembles skin tone a bit more. Maybe something like that. Press OK. And then the very, very last one will be white. And I'll press OK. So this is the effect that it creates. I'll press the OK button. And now with the rectangular marquee tool selected, I'm going to click and drag and create a box around the effect more or less in this area here, but I need to make sure that it doesn't affect the other area. You see how I'm hovering over the other area? Let me just redo that. Click here and drag over right about that much. Enable the gradient map and click on the Add Layer Mask icon to create the effect that you see there. And you can keep adjusting these as much as you need. For example, this one, I think I made it a little too wide, so I'll press Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform, and I can actually transform the layer mask. See that? So I'm going to transform it and maybe bring it even more towards the center where I didn't want it before, and it actually looks better that way now, I think. I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes. I'll select this layer mask. Notice that the focus, the white outline is on the layer mask. That's what you want. Press Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform, and click and drag this one like so. So you can make these adjustments to fine-tune the layer mask. And I think that this looks pretty good. What I'm going to do now is just bring other elements from the other photos onto this one. So I'll select this photo that looks a lot like the photo that is in the actual album cover. I actually took this photo at Adobe HQ. They have a sensory deprivation pod. So this is where I was, and it gives me this cool glow in my eyes, and it looks very similar to the album cover. So I'm going to make sure that this layer is selected, and I'm going to click and drag it over onto this tab and place it here. I'll bring down the opacity and try to match the eyes as best as I can because that's the area that I'm mostly interested in. Then I'm going to click and drag a selection like so, and click on the layer mask icon and increase the opacity like so. I'm also going to create a new levels adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, and also adjust the brightness and contrast. So I'm just going to click and drag on these points like so, just to brighten it up and so that it looks more closely to what is shown in the album cover. And actually, I think that I might have made this a little too tall, so I'm going to make a selection about that big and go back into the layer mask here for the second portrait and fill with black. Black is my foreground color, so I can press Alt and Backspace, Option, Backspace on the Mac. And this is looking pretty good, I would say. Then I'm gonna go back into my JR sources images, and we're gonna use this photo, which is a photo that I use for all my public speaking presentations. I'll make sure that that layer is selected, and I'll click and drag it over into the working document and release. Notice that it dropped it inside of my clipping mask. All I need to do is click and drag it out. And if it's still clipped, you can press Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac to remove the clipping mask. And that's the same key to create one. And again, I'll reduce the opacity and I'll make sure that the eyes match. If they don't, you can press Control T, Command T to transform. Control 0, Command 0 on the Mac to zoom out, and then you can just adjust it accordingly. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and I think this works. I'll increase the opacity, and then I'll just make a selection like so, and click on the layer mask icon to mask that out. I want a little more space on there, so I'm just gonna make a selection here and fill with black. Alt backspace, Option backspace. And I think that I also need to show more of my nose here. So I'm gonna make a selection right about here and go back into this portrait and fill with black. Same keyboard shortcut that we used before. What we're gonna do now is unlink the layer from the layer mask so that we can transform the layer mask. By the way, earlier we didn't have to do this because we were not working with a pixel layer. If you're working with a pixel layer, you do have to unlink it. And with this layer mask selected, I'm going to press Control T, Command T to transform. Then click and drag on the transformation handles to adjust this box accordingly. There's no right or wrong. I'm just trying to get it somewhat close to the original album cover. I'll enable the chain link once again. And when I do that, that also commits the transformation. What I'm going to do now is select this gradient fill layer, the one that creates that effect there. And right above that, I'll create a new layer and I'll call this layer Shadow. And I'll press Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac to clip it to the layer below. Select the brush tool, make sure that black is my foreground color and also that I have hardness set to 0. I'm going to increase my brush size by tapping on the right bracket key, and I'm just going to paint with black right on this area just to create an effect similar to what is found in the album cover. Like so. Next, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to start organizing my layers. So let me click and drag this up so that we have more room to work with. So this is part of the background. So I'll select it and hold Shift and click on the background layer and press Control G, Command G on the Mac. And I'll call this group background. And I'll select this first portrait and select the top one. Press Control G, Command G on the Mac. And that is the portrait group. That way you're more organized and you can enable and disable layers much easier. So with this background group active, I can click on the topmost layer, create a new layer, and I'll also call it shadow, but it will not be black. It will be a dark shade of blue. So I'm going to hold the Alt key. When you have the brush tool active and you hold the Alt key, you can jump into the eyedropper tool to select the color. And I'm just going to select this dark blue and make sure that it's dark enough like that. And I'll paint with this darker blue on the top area here behind my head, like so. And I'm going to collapse this, and right above my portrait layer, I'm going to create another shadow layer. And I guess I should call this one blue shadow since there's already a shadow layer in that group. So blue shadow. And then I'm going to paint over me with that dark blue to create the blue shadow. And again, this is to replicate the effect that you see in the actual album cover. And actually on the original album cover, you can see a straight edge on the right side. So I'll make sure that I can see that straight edge on here as well. Next, we're going to work on the album cover title, and I'll show you how to create the transparent double stroke text effect. And what I'm going to do is just create a text layer above the portrait layer. I'm going to select the horizontal type tool, and I'll make sure that I have Proxima Nova as my font. You can use any font that you like. This is just the one that I'm going to use for the tutorial. And select the regular font weight. And then for my font size, I'll do something like 450 points. I'll click here and I'll type PTC in capital letters. And here's a trick to center text. You can, first of all, click on the check mark to commit the changes, press Control A on Windows, Command A on the Mac to make a selection over the canvas. Then with the move tool, you'll get these options in the option bar, and you can click on this icon to center the text to the canvas. Then I can press Ctrl D, Command D to deselect. I'm going to zoom in by tapping on the Z key and clicking. And what I want to show you guys now is that if you apply a stroke in Photoshop using a layer style outside of the text and make it larger, you're going to have a rounded corner, and that's not what I want for this text. I actually want sharp corners. I'm going to cancel this and show you how to create sharp corners with text in Photoshop. First of all, I'm going to select the horizontal type tool, and I'm going to make sure that I have enough space between the letter P and the letter T. So I'll click in between two characters. I'll hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and tap on the right arrow key to move that over just one space. So I'm adjusting the kerning by holding Alt and tapping on the arrow keys on the keyboard. Then I can duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac, disable the bottom layer, and we're going to convert this text layer into a vector shape since we cannot apply strokes with sharp corners on text layers. So to do so, select the text layer, right click, and convert it into a shape. And now you'll have a vector shape. Then I'm going to press Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac to duplicate that layer, and I'll enable the original. So this is going to be my stroke layer. And what I'm going to do is select the path selection tool. In the options bar, I can remove the fill by clicking on this icon, and then I can add a stroke. I'll make it white by clicking on this color swatch, and I'm going to add a stroke that is 10 pixels. And then I'm going to click on this drop down, and under the align option, I'll select the outside option there, which is the one at the very bottom. And to get the sharp edges, click on the corners drop down and select the very first option, which will give you sharp corners. I can select a rounded corner, but that's not what I want. That's what the layer style gave me. So I'll select the sharp corner. What I'll do now is reduce the opacity to 50%. Then I'll duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac, and I'll increase the stroke to 20. And then hit the Enter key, that's the return key on the Mac, and I get this effect that you see here. And I can enable the original layer, and we have our final result. I can select the top layer, hold Shift, click on the bottom one, and press Ctrl G, Command G on the Mac, and I'll call this text. And what I'll do now is double click on the hand tool and fit the image to screen so that you can see the final result. And there's actually one change that I think I'll make. Although the strokes are transparent like the original album cover, I think that I'm going to select this layer, select the bottom one while holding Shift, and then change the blending mode to soft light. That way some of the color peeks through. And I think that looks much, much better. Then I'll select the horizontal type tool, and I'll make my text 75 points for now, and click here and type best of in lowercase, then click and drag it and place it right about here, like so. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and I'll press Control semicolon, that's Command semicolon in the Mac to hide the guides. What you need to do now is fine tune the image. For example, I can put this best of text layer inside of the text group and maybe move this down a little bit lower, like so. And you can come in here and make adjustments to the color. For example, if you wanted to adjust the walls here in the background, you can click on the background group and just open up either of the smart objects and then adjust the color accordingly any way that you want, just to get a different result. Control S, Command S in the Mac to save, and you can see how that's updated here on the side. And you can pretty much adjust anything that you want in this image. All the adjustments that we made were editable. And this is what my album cover looks like. I spent a few extra minutes fine-tuning the adjustments we made. I didn't add anything new. I adjusted what we already had in the layers panel to make it more closely resemble the original album cover. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How did the album compare to the original? If you liked it, click on that like button now. Also, let me know in the comments if you're enjoying this Copycat Wednesday series, and don't forget to leave your suggestions for future episodes in the comments below. And remember to check out the previous episode on recreating the Homecoming TV poster where we applied a brown and green color grade. The link is also below in the description. I would like to thank the following people for sharing their Homecoming TV poster results on Instagram using the hashtag PTCVids. I really enjoy looking at what everyone is creating. These are fantastic color grades. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And of course, if you create something using this tutorial or any of my tutorials, then upload them into Instagram with the hashtag PTCVids. And if you enjoy the Photoshop training channel, make sure that you're subscribed. So click on that subscribe button now. And if you're already subscribed, then do me a favor. Please click on the notification bell now. Doing so really helps out the channel and it lets you know when a new tutorial is up. Thank you so much for that. Stay healthy and safe. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you again in the next Copycat Wednesday.